Look at your wallet. Driver's license, credit cards, passport. If you lose them, proving you exist is a bureaucratic nightmare. But for 99% of human history, your identity didn't live on a piece of plastic. It lived exclusively inside the brains of your neighbors. Move 3 towns over in the year 1400, and you could be a completely different person. A nobleman, a merchant, a widower. Nobody could check. But this freedom came with a terrifying catch. If someone else walked into your village, knew your dog's name, and claimed to be you, how would you prove they were lying? Today, a plastic card proves you exist. But historically, your existence was a consensus. You did not have an identity. You were a performance, constantly validated by the people watching you. If you lived your whole life in one farming village, this system worked perfectly. Everyone knew you. But the moment you stepped onto the road, you became a ghost. In medieval Europe, walking into a new town without anyone to vouch for you was not seen as an adventure. It was treated as a threat. Without standardized ID, a person with no witnesses was a person with no rules. If you had no local history, the authorities assumed you were running from a crime, a debt, or a master. Vagrancy laws were brutally strict. Simply being a stranger in the wrong place could result in being whipped, imprisoned, or driven out into the forest. To survive travel, the elite carried heavily stamped letters of introduction, sealed with wax. But what if you were a commoner who couldn't read or write? How did you prove you had made a deal, paid a debt, or married a spouse? You used physical passwords. The most brilliant was called a chirograph. When 2 people made a contract, a scribe would write the exact same agreement twice on a single piece of animal skin. Then they would take a knife and cut the parchment in half using a jagged, wavy line. You kept the top half, your partner kept the bottom. Years later, if a dispute arose, you didn't check a signature. You brought the 2 pieces of skin together. If the microscopic jagged edges fit perfectly like a puzzle, your identity and your claim were verified. It was an unhackable physical cryptography. Sometimes people went even further. To prove they were the one who sealed a document, they wouldn't just press a metal ring into hot wax. They would bite the wax, leaving a permanent imprint of their specific crooked teeth. Your dental record was your signature. But what happens when the dispute wasn't over a piece of paper, but over a human being? What happens when 2 people claim to be the exact same man? In 1556, a French peasant named Martin Guerre abandoned his wife and vanished. 8 years later, a man arrived in the village claiming to be Martin. He knew the names of the villagers. He knew intimate secrets about his wife. He knew where old tools were hidden in the barn. The wife accepted him. The village accepted him. For 3 years, this man lived as Martin, had a child with Martin's wife, and claimed Martin's inheritance. But then, a dispute over money made people suspicious. A trial was held. The court was thrown into absolute chaos. Hundreds of witnesses were called. Half swore the man was Martin. Half swore he was an imposter named Arnaud. The judges had no database to consult. No fingerprints. No photographs. In a world without paper ID, courts relied on the only permanent record available, the body. A peasant's body was a map of their life. Judges examined the imposter for a specific scar on his forehead. They looked at his hands. A blacksmith would have different burn marks than a weaver. A man who spent his life walking behind a plow walked differently than a soldier. The imposter almost won. He was incredibly convincing. But at the very last moment of the trial, a man with a wooden leg walked into the courthouse. It was the real Martin Guerre. The imposter was executed. This case terrified the authorities. It proved that community memory was fragile, easily hacked by a charismatic liar. Because identity was so fluid, the state began forcing permanent identities onto people who broke the rules. If the government couldn't issue you a plastic ID card, they would use a hot iron instead. Punitive branding was the ultimate negative ID. In England, a runaway could be branded on the face or shoulder with the letter V for vagabond or M for malefactor. A tattoo or a burn mark was a forced identity. It ensured that no matter how far you ran, no matter what new name you invented, your skin would betray you to the next town guard. For everyday people, the fragility of memory remained a constant problem. If a flood washed away a boundary marker or a landlord died, how did you prove where your property ended? How do you make sure a community remembers an invisible line for 50 years? You outsource the memory to paint. Across Europe, communities practiced something called beating the bounds. Once a year, the village elders would walk the invisible borders of their parish. They would bring the young boys of the village with them. When they reached a key boundary, like a specific oak tree or a rock, they would physically throw the boys into brambles, bump their heads against the tree, or lightly whip them. It sounds insane today, but the survival logic was flawless. 50 years later, when those boys were old men, they wouldn't remember a boring walk, but they would absolutely remember the exact tree where they were thrown into a thorn bush. Without paper records, human trauma was the most reliable hard drive available. We look back at this world and it feels chaotic. A world where you could change your name simply by walking into a forest. A world where your existence depended entirely on whether your neighbors liked you enough to vouch for you. Today, we have solved the Martin Guerre problem. You have a birth certificate, a social security number, a digital footprint, and a biometric scan on your phone. Your identity is locked in a vault of data, completely safe from imposters. But we traded something to get that security. In the past, if your life fell apart, you could walk away, cross a border, and become someone entirely new. The village mind would forget you. Today, the database never forgets. You are perfectly, inescapably documented. You can never truly disappear again.